really hooked on 3D art lately, and I just made my first simulation in Blender. We're going to be looking at the behind the scenes of this project that took me weeks. Some of the things that I did, some of the things that I learned, how I accomplished this, and what it looks like behind the scenes. Here's the animation. We've got the lighthouse looping. This is about a 90-second loop or so. So 2000 frames, I think I did. I wanted a nice full realistic rotation of the lighthouse going all the way around. I'll start with the foreground and just kind of work my way back. Animation's so cool because it's kind of like making a movie. You're just showing what's inside the frame, so nothing else outside of that matters. So when I go to the camera here, like this is what you see, but then when you get out of the camera, this is what it looks like. It's world building, but just inside the frame, and a lot of this other information's cut off because it just saves processing power. One very useful thing here is Blender Kit. I have Blender Kit connected, and I was able to search for objects that helped fill the scene with some things that I would dream up in my head, like, oh, I'd like to have a burlap sack there, and oh, I wonder if there's a burlap sack. That's how I found some of these assets. See, it's right here. The boat was actually free. I found that on a website like CG Trader. You'll see as I come in here, bottle of rum, cups, fruit. I'm just rendering it so you can see real quick. Coconuts and a bench. Blender Kit is a huge help with somebody who's like on a lower budget like me. The other really useful plugin was Botanic. If I do the drop down here, you'll see you can spawn different assets for foliage. What is so cool about this is the animation settings are built in. So what you do is you can convert this to an editable. Once you get all your plants and trees in here, you can add animation to them, and then you can choose like breeze, wind, storm, and set your strength and have them all linked. You can have them randomize. You can loop them a certain amount of frames. So cool. Such a useful add-on. Another challenge was with the sand. I spent way too much time messing around with the sand. It was just hard to get it the way that I wanted it, but it ended up pulling textures also from Blender Kit because Blender Kit has materials as well. Actually, the texture I ended up using might have been from Polyhaven. They also have like scenes and they have HDRs. I ended up using geometry nodes. You'll see there's a geometry node set up here. So I did a tutorial on geometry nodes and I was able to scatter plants around. That way you don't have to go place them all individually. Then you can control the settings all in here with that. For the shells, I ended up using, I believe, particle systems. Yeah, so if I zoom in here, you'll see little details like that make your scene so much more realistic. I use particle systems and I would take one shell and I would spread them in randomized sizes just to get a little bit more realistic ground. So if I render this, you can see there's a big difference between like not having shells there and having shells there. I think it helps a lot. Let's talk about the fire real quick. I had the wood and the rocks here and I ended up using a projection of a fire. This saves a lot of RAM and processing power, and it's also a very realistic way to achieve this. So this is actually footage of a fire that is projected on. You can see the MOV here. What I did is I made a static MOV in DaVinci, exported it, and then I'm able to overlay the fire. If you see, if I move this around, it'll move the video. So the video is basically an alpha. I can't remember exactly how I did it. I did a tutorial on it, but that is a very good way to achieve that. And then what I did is when I got it into DaVinci, I had to touch it up a little bit more, do another layer in DaVinci, and that's also where I ended up adding the smoke. But the embers are actually, these fish were going to be like way too hard to model. Somebody did such a good job with these, and I ended up just purchasing them because I really wanted red snapper there, something native to this area. This is kind of like, if anything, the ship is probably the least accurate thing. Before I forget, I did use an environment texture as my background. So 360 HDR world, as you can see under the world settings here, and that provides this nice light. So as I rotate that around, the shadows and the lighting will change, and I really liked the shadows of the fish here. Moving on to the cabins, again, another free asset, but these roofs, they don't look good right now, and I'll show you why. They look good when they render, but these I actually made using a particle system and hair. What I did is to save RAM, again, I went to the simplify settings under the viewport settings. It's here under simplify. Child particles. If you raise this back up, you'll see exactly how it's actually going to render, and it looks quite nice. But I keep that down to save memory and be able to render things quicker, especially if it's an animation. So just keep that in mind. You can lower all these to 0. to speed up your workflow. Inside here, we have a light flicker. This is supposed to be like a candle inside here. If I hide the shack, now I can click on the light here. Okay, that gives us access to the menu here of that light. It's a point light, and there's not much power here. And what I did is I wanted for this to give like a candle flickering effect. So I went to graph editor here. You can see there was some noise applied in the graph editor. And again, there's tutorials on this stuff. This shows you that light pulsing as it goes up and down. It's getting brighter and darker. And then you just have to play around with that setting and you'll get like sort of a candle flickering effect. So that was cool. I'll go to the water. The water was a huge challenge. I spent like a whole day or two on that. There's so many different ways to do water. I'll show you how I ended up doing it. These are my settings right here, so you can screenshot them if you want. And yeah, that's what I ended up doing. This is pretty standard, and again, this also saves a ton of memory to not use the ocean modifier. Ocean modifier is great for certain things, but a lot of times you can achieve this using like bump mapping, glass, ping pong, multiply, map range. And it's pretty simple actually. And you get a nice calm water moving a certain direction. You play around with the settings, and I actually had the current going toward the ship. So yeah, that's how I did the water. And I don't think there was even an array on this plane. I think it was just a massive plane, but you could also array things if you need to. It's really hard to get water washing onto a shore, so I ended up having these dunes like a little bit higher up so that you wouldn't see the shore, so that I didn't have to try to create like water washing up onto sand. At some point I want to animate water kind of coming up onto a beach and learn how to do that. One challenge with the ship was these sails were actually down, so all I did was just separate them and just make them up because the ship is parked, the sails wouldn't be down. And then I have some lanterns I added here with another light. You actually don't see the light flickering very well, which is fine because it's at a distance. Moving on, almost done here. We're gonna come to the background. More botanic plants. These are not perfectly accurate, but since everything's from a distance, it's fine. And then one thing here to note is I really wanted this shoreline to look more realistic, so I added some mud here. And when I render this, you're gonna see like how bad all of this actually looks, but it just doesn't matter because it's in the distance and you don't notice it in the scene. So the lighthouse, this is extremely detailed. This was modeled actually in plasticity. I will talk more about plasticity, and I've been modeling things in plasticity. I'm very excited to show you. My friend Justin actually modeled this. I'll put a link to his YouTube channel in the description below. He's an incredible artist, and he like detailed the St. Augustine lighthouse like no one ever has, honestly. I don't think anyone's ever like modeled the St. Augustine lighthouse. And amazing attention to detail. And there's actual glass, and you can put a light in here if you want. I simulated the light, the actual lights going around. What I did was just created an empty in the center, did 4 spotlights, one's brighter than the other 3. The actual main beam, you'll see it stretches out much further, and those all rotate around the empty. If I go to the timeline, you'll see this from above, right? And it's about 2,000 frames to a full rotation. Pretty cool. This isn't necessarily the best way to do this, maybe if you're like doing scenes where you see the lighthouse closer up, but it did work for me from a distance because these spotlights actually start on the outside. Lastly, I have this huge rectangle surrounding my scene. What is that? That is if you want to scatter volume. Particles in the air, that's pretty much what it is. That just makes things look more realistic. That's just a simple volume scatter. If I go to my camera view here and I'll go back to the render. Okay, let's say, let me turn this stuff off. Let's say that I bring this density up to 0.01. There you go. Now you're starting to get some fog. Now that's like more morning time to me, and I wanted it to be nighttime. You can play around with that, and I use that a lot. You do have to keep in mind that when you're doing a denoiser, it might actually denoise some of the volumetrics, I think. So you just have to play around with how it actually looks when you render it, because there's what you see in the viewport and then there's what you're gonna see in the render. They're not always exact. Yeah, once I was done, I just put it in DaVinci, added fire, sound effects, ocean background, and some crickets. Looping in DaVinci, I think I just used a crossfade, and that was it. I hope you enjoyed this scene. I'm really stoked on Blender. I was using it like a couple years ago with my older computer to make stills, but now with this computer I can finally do some motion and animation, so that got me a lot more excited. I just have so much to learn. Thanks so much for checking out the behind the scenes of this simulation. Hope you enjoy. And I really appreciate your support because I really want to do more of this. And hopefully I can keep growing the channel in order to do that. Leave your questions, comments below. I would love to nerd out with you about Blender and animation and art. Have a wonderful day, and goodbye for now.